Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to the Asia Tech Podcast. Dominic Schacher, a co-founder of Rently, is with us today. Dominic, thank you so much for coming to the show. Let's give our listeners a little bit of your background for some context before we jump into the main part of this conversation.
Hey, thanks, Michael. Yeah, it's great to be back. So yeah, a little bit of my background. So I'm Swiss. I've been living in Singapore for almost 10 years. Originally, I was only meant to come down for 2 years work assignment. I think, not the only expat that got caught up in this is and ended up staying. But my background's actually quite international. So I'm Swiss. Grew up though in Spain. My parents retired down there. Then decided to go to university over in the UK. Did a master's in finance. Or was thinking about going into investment banking, just as 2009 and 10 hit. So, I'm pretty good with timing. But then decided actually private banking could be quite interesting.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough to receive a job offer in Liechtenstein. Worked there for a couple of years, mainly with UK res non-doms and Russian clients back then. So quite, again, an interesting segment. And then I was sent down to Singapore for 2 years for work assignment. Did that. And then I just ended up staying. So moved across the private banks, then decided to go into asset management, more into private equity, then venture capital. So now, we're running Rently, trying to combine kind of the best pieces of both worlds, tech and finance.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much what I've been doing my entire career is trying to combine those both worlds, tech and finance. When we recorded at the Singapore FinTech Festival, I asked you what would be one word that would define the rental market in Singapore. Do you remember the word that you used?
I think it was chaotic, if I'm not
Chaos.
mistaken. Yeah.
Chaos. And I can't get away from that. Can you just start there and then we'll jump into a little bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, I think when I came down to Singapore myself, never having been to Asia, except for a short holiday, obviously quite daunted, but also quite relaxed about the whole thing. Everybody was saying, "Hey, Singapore, it's the Switzerland of Asia. You'll be fine."
Right.
So yeah, it turns out that was a little bit different when I actually arrived, when it came to finding an apartment. So I think, one thing that's a little bit different I find in Asia to many markets is to find an apartment. Sometimes you only have, a couple of weeks, sorry, 2 weeks, 1 week. So trying to align all these meetings across all these different agents, trying to find listings that double, triple, quadruple listings of the same units. Many units are fake, or fake listings for agents trying to generate business. So really trying to find a place was actually extremely stressful for me. And then I got to the point where I actually found a place. I was like, great, let me sign. And they're like, okay, yeah, well, we need a check, please, for the down payment. I mean, I've never used a check in my life. Like, what am I meant to be doing? And then obviously they didn't even have a bank account in Singapore at the time as well. They wouldn't take transfer. They wouldn't take credit cards.
Really?
So my employer had to lend me a check so I could actually get my apartment. And it's honestly not changed much, right?
Yeah.
They're a little bit more flexible on a check and they're happy to accept pay now and things like that.
Right.
Apart from that, yeah, it's pretty similar. And I expect it to be the same for you guys, in Thailand,
Absolutely.
Dubai, anywhere pretty much. I don't think it's much different.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things that I find, because I've moved around a lot, right? When I moved from New York to Tokyo with Morgan Stanley, and I hired a real estate agent, a couple of real estate agents that actually my firm recommended to me. They took me to places that were not appropriate for me to live. I didn't understand the landscape, if that makes sense. I didn't, and we could talk about it in location, but I had no strategy for understanding where the right place was to live. And you're right, I had 2 weeks to find a place. So it wasn't even enough time excuse that. I didn't even have enough time to kind of make enough friends to figure out what were the right neighborhoods. Yeah. How does that, I presume that's true in Singapore. You don't want to live in the wrong place because then your commute's bad, your shopping's bad, your neighborhood's bad. How do you handle that, and how does Rently look at that?
Yeah, so it's obviously, one thing that's been luckily improving across platforms, not just us, but our competition as well. If you look at, the marketplace piece of it, if you will.
Yeah.
Again, same, anywhere people go, there's usually a couple of different listing portals.
Right.
And they're improving, right? So they sometimes show amenities like schools and supermarkets. Again, it's not great, right? Because I think, finding a place to live, it's a home. They say home is where the heart is. And it's actually quite true because a lot of the factors you can just feel, you can't see. Like, is this condo right? Is the vibe right? Are the kids? Are there enough kids here if you have kids as well? So there's an element of physical interaction which I think platforms can never really truly show.
Yeah.
There's some advancements in AI that trying to kind of match personality to places. But from our end, it's more of, let's provide a great experience end to end, but obviously not with that human touch yet. So it's like, let's show people kind of condos that could be suitable based on these criteria, like schools, supermarkets. But in the end, they still have to go visit and see. But I think, traditionally, that's where the next piece of your chaos starts, which is the paperwork and the financing. That's the piece that we're trying to at least, alleviate for most people.
So can you talk about the current status of the paperwork and the financing as well, and then jump into what Rently's doing to kind of change that entire process? And if there is an AI sort of aspect to that or a tech aspect to it as well. And I do want to say this too, again, just to get back to my experience when I was looking for my first place in Tokyo. Once I'd lived there for a year and they started sending other people out, this gets back to the human element you were discussing. I remember when the new guys and gals came out, I was like, look, your real estate agent's going to show you a bunch of garbage at the beginning. Just ignore it. And here are the places where you're really going to want to live, and make sure, because you're going to spend most of your time on the weekends in the place where you live, it's got to be the place where you want to be, not where they want you to be. There was no tech back then to do that. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I think it's super important, as you noted, but talk about the financing and the paperwork stuff.
Yeah, no, I think, just to touch on that last point, I think that's where we are also different to kind of, other portals, is that we are selective on who we let on. So we don't just let any agent on or any landlord on,
Yeah,
because I think a good agent and a good landlord make a big difference as well to your
absolutely.
experience. But yeah, when it comes to, the traditional renting journey, you go via agents, you find your own places online, you go to visit them, you found your place, and now what? Usually the agent, he comes with a letter of intent, or if you're lucky, it's straight to the tenancy agreement, which you have to sometimes sign physical, wet ink as well. Then they want a check, and then, they want, yeah. So, it's all these things. Then the contract that you usually get is very landlord biased, very agent friendly. And it's just all these different steps, like sending contracts around. Once that's done, you either clear a check or you do a pay now. You never really have a real record of what you have a record of what went out, but the confirmation from the landlord doesn't arrive. They received the money, then you've got to pay the deposit. So it's all these things which are kind of really disjointed. So what we've done is we've decided, once you found a unit and click, offer a price, we have a contract generation tool that actually leverages the government standardized contracts in Singapore. Again, I think, side note here, Singapore is one of the very few places where every contract's different, right? So there's no standardization, which is, leaves you open to a lot of issues as a tenant. So we've decided, look, because we vet the people that come on, and we know they're good people, quote unquote, they're happy to use the CA standardized contract.
Yeah.
So you, as a tenant, know, okay, straight away I make an offer, everything gets pre-filled automatically, everybody gets verified with SingPass, which is again the Singapore DigiID, and you can sign it with one click, again using SingPass. So it's a good contract, it's a fair contract. The landlord is really who he says he is.
Right.
That's a big issue when it comes to scams, which again we can touch on later. And there's no more wet ink running around, all these kind of things. It's all done. And then obviously we get to the financing piece, right? So one, paying your rent, hooking up with the government, with the banks here, with APIs. You can do all the payments actually by eGiro, so you don't need to do that manually anymore. Deposit down payment, I think that's a thing of the past as well. So for us, it's really, once you sign a contract, we'll pay the deposit on your behalf. If you want that, you're fully insured when you move in. So you get home content insurance, fire insurance, damage, locksmith, everything really is done. That's it, you're settled, right? There's no more hassle.
Can we talk a little bit about this curation process as well, right? And I want to go back to this idea about financing and this check, right? So when you first moved in, you said you had to go to your company.
Yeah.
Which is it's not embarrassing for you because it's not your fault. Like the idea that I don't have enough money maybe could be embarrassing, but the idea that I don't have a check, your company must have been like, yeah, that's ridiculous. But if Rently is now standing in the middle, it must make the landlords happy as well to have a standardized contract, but also make them happy that no matter who comes in the door, potentially Rently is going to solve that financing, the down payment, all the insurance stuff for them as well. And can you talk about curation too? Because I think this is really important. You mentioned earlier about on all the portals, there are 4 or 5 multiple listings. Some of them are real, some of them aren't. You curate all that stuff so that if I go to Rently, that thing's actually available. The landlord knows it. Everybody's identified. It feels like a much safer place to transact and easier financially as well, no?
Correct. That's hitting the nail on the head. That's what we try to do. I think the biggest pain is, obviously finding a place that you like, again,
Yeah.
because we'll do a listing. So again, we use SyncPass, my info verification process to actually verify, is the landlord a real landlord if he's an individual? Does he actually own this property? Again, Singapore is very good with that to actually find out who the owner is of the property. And from when on is it available? From that perspective, it's nice for a tenant because again, what you see is what you get. There's one unit, that's it, it's property uniquing, so we don't have a property 15 times. It's less of an issue, if you will, when it comes to the curation process, if you will, for individual landlords, because again, as one landlord usually has one or two properties,
Right.
we just verify that he's real. Again, we take the risk away because stuff happens over our platform. So you as a tenant, even though we might not know the landlord personally, we know who he is, we know everything about him that we need to know, you're fully insured. We take the risk when it comes to scams because we pay the deposit on your behalf if that's what you want. So it's just a much more secure process. But when it comes to the more institutional clients, if you will, so let's talk about agencies, large landlords, co-living spaces, you name it, that's where we actually have a vetting process. So just because you're an agent and you're registered doesn't mean that we'll actually let you participate in the platform. And I think that's the big differentiator between how we look at the business versus all the other existing players.
Yeah.
Because all the players at the moment, they're monetizing with listings. The more listings you have,
Right,
the more money they will make. So it's actually in their interest to have anybody list as many properties as possible, and ideally the same property 20 times because you get paid 20 times for that. We don't monetize there at all. It's completely free because I think that aligns us with the tenant landlord, right? Less is more, but higher quality.
Yeah. Can I just say this? I've always looked at the real estate listing business kind of like the way I looked at the job listing business. You're right. They're just heavily incentivized to have as many listings on there as possible. We've got 25 million listings. To me, doesn't feel like an advantage. Like I'd rather have 5.
Yeah, exactly.
The landlords themselves that have legitimate properties that really want to have them listed and really want to have them rented must be happier to be represented by Rently as well, because look, we always talk about engineers are trying to minimize noise and amplify signals. And your signal is definitely de-amplified if you're on a platform with too many listings. The landlords must love this as well, no?
Yeah, so obviously that's kind of our goal, right? To experience, to provide an experience for both sides that's ideal. So if
Yeah.
you're a landlord, you don't want to list something and then wait 8 weeks to receive an offer. Or, you want people as soon as possible. You don't want an empty apartment.
Yeah.
On the other side, as a tenant, you don't want to go through 80 listings to find one that's actually available.
Right.
So we're quite aggressive in how we manage supply and demand on our platform, right? In terms of kind of the type of tenants that are coming on to kind of match the supply of properties on the other side. There's obviously, a task in itself.
For
But
sure.
yeah, I think it provides a better experience, right? I think people deserve better after, 2024 now. So yeah.
Yeah, but and again, just to make another analogy, like when I walk into a restaurant and the menu has 25 pages of things listed, I don't want to eat there because there's no way they can do something really well. I want to go to an Italian restaurant that has like 5 dishes. Do you know what I mean? Because I know the chef is going to cook it and make it amazing. You
Yes.
mentioned something earlier about fraud. Can you just talk about overall fraud in the market, like how it manifests itself, and then how Rently goes about disintermediating that and mitigating those risks?
Yeah, so surprisingly, it's I think one of the most surprising facts when we speak to from clients to investors to even friends, like Singapore, that there's no fraud. Singapore's so secure.
Right.
Turns out actually rental market is one of the highest fraud cases in Singapore. So there's usually two kind of ways that it happens. The initial one is especially when with a bit of a shortage of housing, maybe it was 18 months ago, prices went rampant. Sometimes apartment prices doubled and people are like, hey, I need a place to live. Like I'm going to get kicked out in a week's time.
Right.
What would happen is that fraudulent agents or people pretending to be agents would say, hey, I've got this apartment, and they would list at a reasonable price. And you would inquire and they'd be like, oh, we have so much demand, like we need to know you're serious, you've got to pay us a down payment.
Oh
So you would
no.
pay $500 or $1,000, right? Which again, when you're stressed with your family and you're going to be homeless in a week's time, and it's an agent or what you think is an agent, it seems kind of something that could be true.
Right.
Which it turns out the apartment and the agent were never real, right? So
Oh
that
my
money just
God.
disappeared. So you have quite a bit of that. And then you've got quite a bit again, people showing apartments that aren't theirs, they collecting the down payment and actually place isn't there. You have landlords, fake landlords double letting units. So there's been a few articles of that, and a landlord just letting out to 3 or 4 families, they all show up at the same time, and you can't move. And again, that's more rare, but that happens quite a bit as well.
Can I just ask what the legal framework is around that in Singapore, if you don't mind commenting on it? Because that
Yeah, no,
feels to me like in a country like Singapore that seems so well regulated and so well managed, right? And where their reputation is so important to them externally,
yeah.
that seems almost unfathomable to me.
Yeah, so the legal framework is okay, right? In that, obviously, if that gets, well, it depends a little bit, can you prove it, right? Again, comes back for us, we
Fair
use
enough.
SyncPass for everything.
Yep.
So the landlord can't say, oh no, I didn't sign this. It's like, it was literally geotagged to your biometrics,
Right.
so, but like, as long as you can prove it, you can go through small claims court, assuming that they agree with kind of the verdict that there was fraud, you can get your money back. Obviously, that's dependent upon the guy cheating you. A, you can find him, or B, that actually he has money to pay you back. So the process is there. I think enforceability is relatively questionable, just because a lot of the scams are from overseas
Fair
people as
enough.
well. So again, for us using SyncPass, you have to be here, so that fraud risk just goes to zero. Hence, we're also obviously happy to take that risk. We pay the deposit on behalf of our tenants. We know we're established, we know we're well funded. If something happens, whether it be fraud or just other, again, we can get to that afterwards, kind of peculiarities with the landlords withholding deposits and things like that. We know there's a legal process in place. We'll just go through it. It's fine for us.
So again, just to get back to the difference between a normal real estate portal and what Rently's doing, it always surprised me, and I've thought about this for years, right? That the portal just lists things and they don't get involved in any other part of the transaction. Like none of it. They're just there to
Yeah.
connect you, maybe, and then you're on your own with an agent or whomever you're dealing with. Can you talk about this like front to back integrated solution approach that you have and where just kind of everything fits in and why it's such a massive differentiator?
Yeah, so I think that the reason why most people stopped at the portal piece is because after that it gets complex.
It's hard.
And yeah, exactly, which obviously we found as well, right? So it wasn't straight sailing and easy. But they're making so much money with listings. If you're a dominant player in any market and you're the number one listing portal, there's very little incentive to do anything else because the cash keeps on rolling in. There is no alternative.
Yep.
You are the monopoly. What we've just found is, maybe a simple analogy. When you go to book a holiday, you go on booking.com, you find the place, you book, you pay, you're done.
Right.
You arrive at the hotel. Anything goes wrong, booking.com sorts it out for you, right? If the payment wasn't done or there's an issue with the hotel, like why isn't that available in real estate? You never question if the hotel in booking.com is legitimate or not. You
Right.
know it is because
Right.
booking.com has done the work. You pay on that platform because you trust that platform. So for us, it's really about that, right? So once you found your place, that's when the process starts. Both sides, landlord and tenant, they've got this trusted intermediary in the middle in case something goes wrong. But it just makes everything else easier as well, right? As I said, you find the place, you sign, deposits paid for, we'll hook up the bank accounts, we can e-gyro your payments for you as well. Obviously, we have a repair feature. Again, we've not released that yet because it introduces new complexities, but the biggest thing is always when something breaks at home,
Yeah.
to find a handyman, and then you've got to message the landlord and maybe he's not in town. So, all that is taken care of as well, or will be relatively shortly. And then I think the biggest piece, which we haven't built yet, but which is actually one of the most interesting pieces, is one of the biggest hassles when you move is connecting your new electricity, changing your address with your banks, changing your address with insurers. Theoretically, that's all possible with SyncPass. It's just one message saying, hey, by the way, Michael now lives here. So actually, for us, there's nothing stopping us from doing that. Super seamless afterwards.
So it's not just connecting the landlord with the renter and vice versa. And again, I want to understand how you actually make the payments and do the down payment and stuff like that for somebody, right, that they're not doing themselves. But this idea then that you're also providing services, because now it gets much more interesting, right? Again, I always say this is my favorite business. You're building this horizontal kind of platform business that's based
Yep.
on rental properties and then saying what other services do people that are renting need? And also what are the services that people that are renting the apartments, meaning the landlords need, because they need services as well, right?
Yep.
Whether it's an escrow service or all the other things that they need. And you're plugging it on both sides, but multiple things. I like this idea of also the service providers. Who knows? You may even do babysitting and like fixing the air conditioners and stuff like that. Is that all part of the idea?
Yeah. So it's, I think the vision for us is really like making renting hassle free. That
Yeah.
is for both sides, right? So anything that's a hassle we can solve, right? So I think the cool thing is because everything happens on our platform, right? So the rental contract is done on our platform. We know the key details that we need to know about the apartment. The inventory of the quality of the apartment is done on our platform. So pictures of the air cons, everything is done on our platform. So when you say, hey, I need my aircon repaired, it's as simple as saying, hey, select which one, send it out to the service providers. They come back, they have the pictures, they have the address, they have the floor size, they know how many aircons you have. It's all there. And it's like, okay, schedule an appointment. And, sync it up with your Outlook calendar at work. So that kind of syncs up as well. You tell a service provider, hey, these are the slots you can choose. When do you want to come by? Right. So it works extremely well because we do that next piece, which is the contract piece.
Yeah.
And yeah, then it just makes renting hassle free. If you like anything you have, you just open Rently and you click a button, it's done.
I think I might have told you this when we were sitting at the Singapore FinTech Festival, but I was sitting in my apartment a few months ago and literally somebody knocked on my door. I don't know if I mentioned this to you.
Yeah, I remember.
And it was just like someone claiming they were the landlord.
How do you know?
I have no idea, but I didn't have a choice. I was on a call like this. I just said, give me a second. I opened the door. They came in. You know what they did? They started taking pictures. You're laughing, but this actually happened to me. And then they left. But my feeling is like, whenever I need to get my air conditioners fixed, I don't even know who to call to ask, right? When I need to do all this other stuff. Here, I need to hire a maid to clean as well. Like all these services would be so much better. I feel like at some level, the portals who are then printing a ton of money, as you said, because they've got all these listings on it, are going to look at what you're doing and think, well, it's kind of embarrassing for us now. Like I can say it, maybe you can't, but because we provide no other services, right? At all. Zero.
Yeah, like they are trying, right? So I think they've noticed as well. So some of the larger ones are trying to do different things. They're even acquiring smaller players in specific niches
Sure.
or aircon repair and things like that, because they do realize, okay, like what we're offering probably isn't kind of up to standards, kind of what people should expect nowadays when it comes to technology. But it's also hard to change.
Yeah,
But if you built your infrastructure for the last 10, 20
exactly.
years to do one thing, not so easy to then pivot and say, look, you can add other services, but to make it successful, it's really quite difficult.
It is. I mean, look, I learned this when I was at Goldman Sachs, and we were taking an existing trading system, right? So a market-facing trading system, and trying to rebuild a brand new one. What we couldn't do was take the existing system and fit it to the new technology because the exchanges tech stack had completely changed, and this was really old, and we had to build modern, and we literally had to start from scratch. And my feeling on this, and again, tell me where I'm wrong here, is that the existing portals built their businesses, their tech stack, and their business model to look a particular way. And to then compete, even if and Citibank tried to do this, if you try to buy all these little players and then integrate them in, I'm telling you, all you're doing is creating one gigantic technological mess. And if you build a business from scratch with the proper tech stack and the proper flexibility from the beginning, you have a much better chance of succeeding. Yeah.
No, 100% agree, right? I think, I come from banking, so I see them trying to like cram new technology onto
Right, right.
and it's just
It
it's
doesn't
clunky at
work.
best, but it doesn't work. So again, when we built this from day one, I always said, look, we need to build it in a way that's actually, again, I'm not a tech person, but for me, I call like in silos in
Yeah,
terms of, the DigiID in Singapore is great, but if you go to Dubai, it's a different set of
right,
DigiIDs.
right.
You go to the Netherlands, again, different set, right? Different signing infrastructure, different security infrastructure, different APIs, different connects with the government. So we've built it in a way that for us, it's plug and play.
Yeah,
For the time being, again, let's speak in 10 or 20 years, we might be the old company, which, didn't get with the times. But that's super important to build things with foresight and actually
yeah,
realize, things will change.
absolutely.
That served us quite well, right?
Yeah.
Because we had to pivot a few times a little bit to find kind of product market fit. And luckily, we didn't have to rebuild everything. It's just tweaking a few things.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to this analogy one more time and then I want to move on. But we realize as well that if you're trading in multiple equity markets, you have to build a system that's flexible enough to handle every different market microstructure. And at the end of the day, they're all different and they're all changing and dynamic. And if you don't build a piece of dynamic technology, you're just going to lose. We did talk a little bit about this multi-pillar strategy that you have. Maybe you can share what that strategy is and then maybe a success story where you've seen it actually work and play itself out.
Yeah, so I think, for us to be, and again, I think that's why prop tech is such a hard industry actually to
Yeah.
be successful in. We built our strategy kind of around three main areas. So one is financing, the other one is listings or like marketplace, and the other one is what we call REMS, real estate management. Right, so it's actually three pieces that need to come together for it to kind of pan out how we want it to. So again, I explained the marketplace piece quite a bit. Again, listings, I think we're not doing something magically new there. I think we're doing stuff better. It's faster, it's nicer, but there's nothing different there. I think what's a game changer is for us the real estate management piece. Again, all that contract automation built on DigiIDs, SyncPass sign, completely adaptable to kind of any of the inputs that people need, is actually kind of what makes us special then, right? So, if you think about contracts, usually it's a piece of paper, right? Like, hey, Michael, I'm going to buy that bike from you. Here's a piece of paper, sign it for me.
Right.
What we actually do is we build our contracts in a basically a database format. So we just have variables coming in once everything is there that we need. So things like, has he identified with SyncPass? Do we know his name, address, when he moves in? Do we know the landlord? Do we know that he owns the place? A contract gets generated instantly based on that data and based in the format that we want, and is instantly signable and is then encrypted and filed with the government as well. So if there's any dispute afterwards, you can track that, right? So it's not blockchain, but it's pretty much similar in that it's hashed and it's enforceable.
Interesting.
And from there, obviously, for us, then we can do all our financing, right? So quite simply, you don't want to pay a deposit because A, you can't, B, you don't trust the landlord, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But it's fine, right? We have all the data that we need on you and the landlord, and we have an enforceable contract. We can pay it for you. Automatically, there's no credit risk, doesn't really matter that much, right? Because again, it's just a deposit to the landlord. We know the people, we have the data kind of on how people pay, how they don't pay back. But I think even more interesting is afterwards, is actually all the financial services around that you can offer. Let's say I'm the landlord and you've rented a place for me for 24 months and tomorrow is, I don't know, my daughter's wedding. Okay, a bit too young for that, but let's just go with that analogy. And you want $30,000. Maybe you don't have that, maybe you have it, but you don't want to sell assets, or maybe, whatever it might be. Why don't you just borrow against future rent? We know who Michael is. We know he's verified. We know his job. We know his salary. We know he's quote unquote good for the money.
Right.
We know your asset, which is your apartment. We know you own it. So we can actually lend you against that. Things like rent now, pay later, I think is a big topic for me, because a lot of people work, less so in Singapore, but in general, a lot of people work in the gig economy, right? So they get paid daily, they get paid weekly, but they need to save up all their money to pay the rent once a month because that's what the landlord wants. Why can't we let them pay on a daily basis or on a weekly basis just to make their lives easier, right? So it's just a lot of flexibility you get once you have that, real estate management software piece in place and actually doing kind of what it's meant to be doing, right? Feeding into the credit model, feeding into the payments infrastructure, and feeding obviously into the government databases as well to get the verifications that you need.
Where do you get the funding or the capital to be able to just like do something simple like make the down payments for people? Do you have to maintain your own balance sheet as well, or are you funding that out of other fees and services that you're doing?
We have a vehicle where we raise debt from investors, which comes obviously from the multifamily office, which I run, but also external investors. And then we use that to kind of pay for the deposits. Obviously, our credit risk model is hopefully relatively sophisticated.
Yeah.
So we take the full risk of defaults on our own books. So our investors, don't take any of that risk. So it's a little bit similar to a bank, right? We have our, capital adequacy ratios that we need to keep. Make sure that we run our risk book in a way that makes sense, and then everybody should go home happy.
I love this idea though, right? It's almost like you're building a fintech inside of a PropTech or a PropTech inside of a fintech, or just creating an entirely new business model. What was the generation for you? Because you mentioned the family office and the sort of debt facility that you have. What sparked the idea for you to be able to do this, right? How did you understand that being able to use that access to capital could then be applied to the real estate market? That's first of all. But second of all, what else can you do now that you have this kind of two-sided market, access to capital, and then access to opportunities to lend that capital out?
Yeah, so again, I think the experience came from two areas, right? One, obviously, as a founder, if you've gone through the pain yourself,
Yeah.
get it. So I think, having pretty poor experience when it comes to renting definitely helped. From the family office side, like we looked at a lot of PropTechs, especially in 2018 and 19. And they were all great ideas. They had some great founders, like very capable founders. But my thinking was always like, they're not going to be able to pull this off when it comes to the execution, just because the value proposition isn't strong enough. for kind of what they're offering at the price point which they're offering at and how much it costs them to run. However, if you actually built it like this, and offered kind of these additional services to it, it could make sense. And that's kind of what sparked the idea.
Do you feel like all the experience you've had up until now working in private banking, working in private equity, working in venture capital has kind of prepared you uniquely and your team to be able to do this because you can see things in a way that maybe other founders could not have seen in the prop space?
Yeah, I think it definitely helps, right? So I made the conscious decision actually to take more co-founders than other people would. So we have 5 actually,
Oh, wow.
which is very, very rare.
Yeah.
Actually, there was a conscious decision behind that again, because it's such a complex thing to get right.
Yeah.
We're basically competing in 3 separate businesses. If you look at it, real estate management, listings, and financing. I know I'm pretty good at finance.
Right.
I know I'm also not very good when it comes to tech, right? So it was a conscious decision actually to bring certain people in that bring that value, right? So we have our CTO, ex-Alibaba Trendle. We've got one of our architects, which is, again, he's just joining now, but he's one of the top architects when it comes to tech infrastructure in Europe, right? Because it is just so complex to run, and there's just no way I could run that. I don't have the knowledge on the tech side, right? They could tell me anything, and I'd have to believe it. So that's kind of, I think, what makes us very unique, right? It's a very conscious decision to take on more people just to make sure that it actually works properly.
Interesting. Okay, before I let you go, this has been really fascinating actually, but before I let you go, tell me about the future. If you're expanding to other countries, other domains, other locations, and what some of the challenges are about that.
Yeah, so we're already doing Singapore, we're in Hong Kong already. We're going to hopefully 2 more markets. Mostly UAE is quite big on our list.
Yeah.
Because of the expat population that you have. The financial services industry is relatively regulated. It's relatively clear cut. So that's definitely quite high up on our list, to be at least in 4 markets this year. Once the tech is built and the way we've built it, it's actually relatively adaptable, right? So then it's all about go-to-market and execution. So challenges, obviously, again, let's say we go to Dubai, it's a new market. Again, luckily the contracts are standardized there, which makes that life really straight away a little bit easier. But then it's all about go-to-market and execution, right? How do you get people to know about you? How do you get them to trust you? Because again, we are the intermediary, if you will. It does need the element of trust. It needs capital. It needs good people. So the usual things, I think, when you expand to new markets.
Okay, I'm going to let you go, Dominic. Dominic Schacher, co-founder of Rently. I really appreciate you doing this today. I want to be able to follow up with you as you continue to expand because I want to get a better understanding myself about some of these other market microstructures, how they're different than Singapore, and also just what the progress is. When you operate in one market, it's still non-trivial, but when you expand to like multiple markets, things get really non-trivial and really complicated, particularly because, like you said, you're trying to run 3 businesses at once inside of one infrastructure. I'm super curious how this goes. Anyway, thank you so much for doing this today. Super awesome.
Thank you for having me. Great as always. Thanks so much.